They said I was finished. Too old at 32. A has-been chasing one last payday. I'd been banned for 3 years for refusing Vietnam. I'd lost to Joe Frazier. People thought I'd lost a step. Then there was George Foreman. 25 years old, undefeated in 40 fights with 37 knockouts. He'd destroyed Joe Frazier in 2 rounds, the same Joe who'd beaten me. He'd demolished Ken Norton in 2 rounds, Ken who'd broken my jaw. George was a wrecking machine who hit so hard grown men collapsed like their strings had been cut. The odds had me as 8-1 underdog. Sports writers begged me not to fight, saying George would kill me. My own doctor said I was making a mistake. Even my closest friends thought I'd lost my mind. But I knew something they didn't. George Foreman had a weakness, and I was going to exploit it in front of the whole world in Kinshasa, Zaire, in the heart of Africa. This is the story of the rumble in the jungle. The greatest night of my life. The night I proved that intelligence beats strength, that strategy beats power, that Muhammad Ali was still the greatest. Don King convinced Zaire's president, Mobutu Sese Seko, to host the fight. Mobutu wanted to put Zaire on the map, show Africa's power. He put up $10 million, $5 million for each fighter, the biggest purse in boxing history at that time. We arrived in Zaire in September 1974, 6 weeks before the scheduled October 25th fight. I fell in love with Africa immediately. This wasn't just a fight. It was a homecoming. I was connecting with my roots, with the land my ancestors had been stolen from. The Zairean people embraced me like family. Everywhere I went, crowds chanted, "Ali, Bomaye! Ali, kill him!" They saw me as one of them. George represented the American establishment, even though he was black too. George didn't understand this. He came to Zaire with his German shepherd, in a country where colonial police had used them to terrorize Africans. He stayed isolated. Meanwhile, I was in the streets, playing with children, absorbing Africa's energy. But let me be honest, I was scared. Not of getting hurt, but of the raw power George possessed. I'd watched the tapes. George Foreman hit harder than any heavyweight in history. His jab was like most fighters' power punch. His power punches could break ribs, collapse lungs. I knew I couldn't trade punches with George. My usual strategy, dance, move, tire them out, wasn't going to work. George was younger, stronger, and trained to cut off the ring. So, I developed a different plan. A crazy plan so risky I didn't tell Angelo Dundee until fight night. I was going to let George hit me, lean back on the ropes and let him punch himself out. Use his greatest strength, his power, against him. People later called it rope-a-dope. I called it survival. Then disaster struck. George got cut above his eye during sparring. The fight was postponed 6 weeks to October 30th. 6 more weeks of waiting, 6 more weeks of doubt creeping in. But those weeks helped me. I spent more time with the people, drew more energy from their support, and George became more isolated, more frustrated, more arrogant. He thought the fight was a formality. I used those weeks to train my body to absorb punishment. I had sparring partners pound my ribs, my arms. I practiced leaning on the ropes, covering up, making myself a smaller target while appearing open. I was preparing for the most unconventional fight of my career. Fight night arrived. October 30th, 1974, 4 a.m. local time, scheduled early so American TV could broadcast it live during prime time. The stadium held 60,000 people. The energy was electric, spiritual, transcendent. In the dressing room, I was loose, confident. But inside, my heart was racing. This was it. Everything I'd worked for would be tested. Angelo was taping my hands when I told him, "I'm going to the ropes." He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "What? Ali, you can't let George hit you. He'll kill you." "Trust me, Angelo. I know what I'm doing. Walking to the ring, the crowd was deafening. Ali, Bomaye, Ali, Bomaye. 60,000 voices chanting as one. This wasn't just boxing. This was a spiritual event, a cultural moment, a symbol of Black power and African pride. George entered looking like a destroyer. Massive shoulders, tree-trunk legs, fists like concrete. He had that dead-eyed stare that terrorized opponents. He wasn't there to box. He was there to annihilate. The referee called us to center ring. I started talking immediately. You've been hearing about how bad I am since you was a little kid. Tonight, I'm going to show you how great I am. George said nothing, just stared. But I saw something flicker in his eyes. The bell rang for round 1. George came out throwing massive hooks and uppercuts. But I was dancing, moving, making him miss. I popped him with hard jabs that snapped his head back. For 90 seconds, I was the old Ali, floating like a butterfly. Then I did something crazy. I backed up against the ropes. The crowd gasped. Angelo screamed, "Get off the ropes!" But I stayed. George's eyes lit up. He thought he had me trapped. He started throwing bombs. Left hook, right cross, left hook, right uppercut. Massive punches that would have knocked out anyone else. But I leaned back on the ropes, letting them absorb impact. I covered up, protecting my head and body with my arms and gloves. The punches that landed hit my arms, my gloves, my shoulders, anywhere but my vital areas. And I talked. "Is that all you got, George? My grandmother hits harder. You ain't nothing." George couldn't believe it. Nobody had ever taken his punches and talked trash. He threw harder, faster, trying to shut me up. But every punch takes energy. The harder you throw, the more energy you use. And if you're hitting arms and gloves, you're wasting that energy. By the end of round 1, George had thrown over 100 punches. I'd thrown 30. Mine were efficient. His were desperate, wild. Round 2 was the same. I went to the ropes, let George tee off, and talked trash. "That's all you got? Come on, champ." I could feel George slowing. His punches were still hard, but slower. His breathing was heavier. Round 3, George showed frustration. He'd been told this would be easy. But here I was, taking his best shots and laughing. I started opening up, throwing combinations when George paused. Fast, sharp combinations that snapped his head back. Round 4, George was fading. His punches were noticeably slower. The Zaire heat was draining him. All those wasted punches were adding up. I started landing more. Straight rights, left hooks. I was picking him apart. Between rounds, Angelo finally understood. You're letting him punch himself out. Now you getting it. This is round 5. Time to go to work. Before we continue with how this fight ended, I need you to do something. If you're enjoying this story, if you want to hear more untold tales from boxing's golden era, hit that subscribe button right now. We're bringing you the real stories behind the legend, the strategy, the psychology, the faith, the humanity behind every punch. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Trust me, the stories we have coming will blow your mind. Now, let's get back to round 5 in Kinshasa. Round 5 was when the fight turned. George came out still trying to pressure me, but running on fumes. His power was there, but his speed was gone. His legs were heavy. I came off the ropes, started moving, boxing, making him work. Jab, jab, right hand. Move, jab, jab, left hook. George was too slow, too tired. You're supposed to be the big bad monster. You don't look so bad to me. Round 6, I was dominating, landing combinations at will. George was still dangerous. One punch could still end it, but he was fighting on instinct now. No strategy. Round 7, George was a shell of himself. The invincible monster who destroyed Joe Frazier was now a tired heavyweight, getting outboxed by the old man. I could have stopped him in round 7, but I wanted to make a statement. I wanted the world to see George Foreman completely broken, completely dominated. Round 8 started with George plodding forward with nothing left. I was countering everything. Then, 2 minutes in, I saw my opening. George threw a lazy jab. I slipped it and threw a 5-punch combination. Left jab, right cross, left hook, right cross, left hook. Every punch landed clean. The last left hook caught George perfectly on the chin. Time slowed down. George's eyes glazed over. His legs wobbled. He started to fall, first to his knees, then face first onto the canvas. The referee counted. 1, 2, 3. The crowd was going insane. Ali, Bomaye. 4, 5, 6. George was trying to get up, shaking his head. 7, 8. He got to his feet, but his legs weren't under him. He staggered sideways. 9, 10. The fight was over. Muhammad Ali had done the impossible. I had knocked out George Foreman. I had reclaimed the heavyweight championship of the world. I jumped onto the ropes, arms raised, screaming, I told all of you, I am the greatest. The crowd poured into the ring, people crying, celebrating, lifting me up. It wasn't just a boxing victory. It was a cultural victory, a statement that intelligence and strategy could overcome brute force. Everyone who doubted me, who'd said I was finished, they were all wrong. At 32, supposedly past my prime, I'd just pulled off the greatest upset in boxing history. But it wasn't just about the physical fight. It was about the mental game. From the moment I arrived in Zaire, I was fighting George psychologically. I made him uncomfortable, isolated, frustrated. By fight night, George wasn't just fighting Muhammad Ali. He was fighting 60,000 Zaireans, the spirit of Africa, the weight of expectation. Meanwhile, I absorbed all the love, all the energy Zaire offered. I turned that stadium into my temple, the Zairean people into my congregation. George never had a chance mentally. The rope-a-dope worked because George had been trained to destroy aggressive fighters. Nobody had ever just let him punch himself out. Nobody had been smart enough, or crazy enough, to absorb his punishment while waiting for him to tire. After the fight, George was gracious. He was better than I thought. He had a plan, and it worked. I got no excuses. Over the years, we became friends. George took time off after that loss, came back, then retired, and became a minister. He told me once, that night, you didn't just beat me physically. You beat me mentally. You had me doubting myself from round 1. That's the difference between a good fighter and a great fighter. Good fighters rely on physical tools. Great fighters use their minds. George eventually came back to boxing in his 40s and won the heavyweight title at age 45, becoming the oldest heavyweight champion ever. When he did, he called me. I learned from the best. You showed me age doesn't matter if you're smart. The rumble in the jungle became more than a fight. It became a cultural touchstone, a moment that transcended sport. It showed the underdog could win, that intelligence could overcome strength, that an aging champion could still shock the world. Decades later, filmmakers would make When We Were Kings, an Academy Award-winning documentary about that night. Musicians would reference it in their songs. Writers would analyze it in books. The fight became a symbol of possibility, proof that with the right strategy and unshakable belief, you can overcome any odds. Young fighters still study that fight today, trying to understand the rope-a-dope, trying to replicate what I did. But here's what I always tell them. You can't just copy the technique. You have to understand the psychology behind it. You have to be willing to take punishment in the short term for victory in the long term. You have to have absolute faith in your plan, even when everyone around you is screaming that you're making a mistake. For me, it was redemption. They'd taken away 3 years of my prime because I refused an unjust war. They'd tried to break me, but I never wavered. My faith taught me that standing for truth is more important than any championship. Those 3 years taught me patience. They taught me that success isn't always immediate, that sometimes you endure a long, dark night before the dawn breaks. The Quran promises, indeed, with hardship comes ease. I held on to that promise during my exile, and God fulfilled it in Zaire. Coming back wasn't easy. I'd lost prime years, from 25 to 28, peak years for any athlete. My reflexes had slowed slightly. My legs weren't quite as quick. The young Cassius Clay who danced circles around Sonny Liston couldn't have beaten George with rope-a-dope. He wouldn't have needed to. But the mature Muhammad Ali, tempered by exile and hardship, had developed something more valuable than speed: wisdom. My Islamic faith teaches that God tests those he loves, that trials are opportunities for growth. My exile was a test. The fight against George was a test. And by staying true to my principles, trusting God's plan, I emerged victorious. Standing in that ring, belt around my waist again, I felt profound gratitude. Gratitude to God for giving me strength. Gratitude to the African people for embracing me. Gratitude to everyone who believed in me when the world said I was finished. People ask about my greatest fight. For me, it's the rumble in the jungle. That night, I had to be perfect. One mistake and George would have taken my head off. I had to execute a strategy nobody believed in. I had to be physically tough enough to absorb George's power, mentally strong enough to stick to the plan, and spiritually centered enough to stay calm under the most intense pressure imaginable. And I did it all, perfectly. The images from that night became iconic. They represented something bigger than boxing. They represented the triumph of the human spirit, the power of self-belief, the victory of mind over matter. That night in Kinshasa, under the African stars, with 60,000 voices chanting my name, I proved something I'd been saying my whole career. I am the greatest. Not just because of physical gifts or boxing skills, but because I had the courage to take the hardest path, to stand up for my principles even when it cost me everything, and to come back and defeat the unbeatable. The rumble in the jungle was proof that when you trust in God, trust in yourself, and trust in your plan, you can overcome any obstacle. George Foreman was the obstacle everyone said I couldn't overcome. But on October 30th, 1974, in Kinshasa, Zaire, I didn't just overcome him. I dominated him. I made the impossible look inevitable. That's what legends do. We don't just win. We rewrite reality. We make people believe in the impossible. We show the world that with enough courage, intelligence, and faith, anything is possible. Ali, Bomaye. Ali, kill him. And I did. Not with brute force, but with my mind, my heart, and my unbreakable spirit. That's the real story of the rumble in the jungle. The night Muhammad Ali proved, once and for all, that the greatest isn't just a nickname, it's a destiny.